Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Matt in Rome, covering the last days of the Synod on the Family and realistically, in all likelihood, the last days of the Catholic Church as we know it. Just got out of the press conference today here at the Synod, and I got to tell you, things seem to me to be worse than even we thought. I'm somewhere between shocked, offended, scandalized, and downright furious by what happened. I mean, you see, what we're finding out is that the Synod on the Family is really just a lot of window dressing for the creation of what they are now calling a new church. It's all about the rise of this new synodal church, as Pope Francis likes to call it, which means that this is just going to keep going on and on. So today's press conference was hosted by Father Federico Lombardi, of course, who went over the basics about what's going to be happening with the release of this new document, the final document tomorrow. But you came out of the press conference wondering if it really even matters what is contained ultimately in this document, because this thing is just getting started. The first part of the press conference was a whole lot of fun, because what we heard about was how great the Synod Fathers are and just how hard they're working and how dedicated to their work that they are. And it's just amazing how incredible they are. It really reminded me of the Oscars ceremony in Hollywood, where the movie industry gets together once a year to congratulate itself on how awesome they are at creating first-rate raunchy porn and brainwashing on the big screen. Same sort of feeling. It was very self-congratulatory. The press conference was manned by Cardinal Peter Turkson of Ghana and the Archbishop of Quebec, and also the Primate of Canada, Gerald Lacroix, and Belgium's Bishop Lucas Van Looy as well. And you could have cut the subterfuge and the doublespeak with a knife here in the press hall today. It was pretty amazing. Essentially, we all were gathered there as members of the press to hear the Synod spin doctors tell us why the words of our Lord and the traditional and infallible teachings of the Catholic Church are just not quite up to snuff in handling our progressive and evolved society's modern problems, such as divorced and remarried Catholics coming back into the sacramental life of the Church. So we heard lots about mercy, of course, and something they keep repeating is accompanying families. Accompaniment is what the Synod is all about, accompanying families on their journeys. And most of all, the Synod was about listening. So the Church is finally listening, I guess, because we're to believe that for the past 2,000 years, the Church didn't give a flying fig about her children. Or at least not until Gaudium et Spes in the Second Vatican Council showed us how to do that. And it's really not seriously until the election of Pope Francis to the papacy has the Church really learned anything about listening and mercy and so forth. Now finally the Church is listening, which of course is, to me, seems like nothing more than an excuse for our progressive new hierarchs to do whatever they want after the Synod and down the road. After all, they're listening to the people of God, so how can the people of God not be listened to? We must listen to them. That's the ultimate authority all of a sudden in the new democratic church that we have. So the shepherds really have no choice but to follow the sheep wherever the sheep might lead. And this is essentially what we're being told. So they're all listening. We're all listening. Everybody's listening. Cardinal Lacroix went so far as to suggest that God himself was here at the Synod today, and guess what he was doing? You got it. He was listening. Even God will evidently now realize what has to be done and how to proceed thanks to the Synod on the Family of Pope Francis. Did I mention that this Synod is about listening? Because it's pretty much listening straight all the way through. Listening to the world's Catholics, by the way, who for the past half century, thanks to our modern shepherds and their policies, have gotten stones rather than bread, were never catechized, thanks to the great spirit of Vatican II, and who are now living in shipwrecked family situations, having spent a half century drinking deeply from the poisonous wells of the spirit of Vatican II, and I'm sorry, yes, the new Mass. This is why these people don't know if they're coming or going. They're divorcing, they are contracepting, and they're homosexualizing themselves to death at about the same rate as the rest of the world. But, so we heard today in the Synod press hall, no worries, have no fear. Our modernist shepherds and popes, all of them, the bishops and popes together, we have put these people on the road to perdition in the first place. Let's not forget, they want to get together and listen to them, and listen some more, and listen. This whole thing is like some bizarre Cold War Soviet social engineering experiment. Brainwash the people, first of all, and then ask them after a few generations to parrot back what Big Brother wants to hear. But even from a worldly perspective, from modern standards, who really wants to be part of this church anymore? That only now, finally, after 2,000 years, after 2 millennia, finally is beginning to listen to what so many of the sheep have been struggling with all along. But up until this time, the church has just been dictatorial and heartless, apparently. The church, the same church that now must convene synods, ecclesial sensitivity sessions, if you will, so that the bishops of the world can finally begin to learn something about their flocks and how to shepherd them with real life problems. I'm not making this up. This is how it comes off. The church that can't even fill its own pews anymore and is now pointing fingers back at the church of 2,000 years, which built mighty Christendom and baptized half the world. This is preposterous. But that's the message that we heard. Finally, the Catholic Church is coming around. This whole synod is emblematic of a church that is supremely out of touch. They want to be self-help coaches and marriage counselors and life coaches and social engineers, but nothing about the soul, nothing about the four last things, nothing about knowing, loving, and serving God. Absolutely zilch, nada, nothing. These men seem to have abandoned their missions. And now they want to be taken seriously as the collective sort of ecclesial equivalents to Dr. Phil or Dr. Drew, the sort of Dear Abby church that listens. Well, isn't that nice? While everyone's losing their families, while millions of babies are being aborted, it's unbelievable to sit and listen to these men. Even members of the press today were getting a bit impatient with all the self-congratulatory rhetoric about how wonderful these big listening bishops are for finally agreeing to somehow, somewhere, figure out how to become pastors to their sheep. One reporter from Ireland asked whether the Synod cares at all about families who aren't divorced or homosexual or otherwise dysfunctional. I thought it was a pretty good question. What about the good people? What about the ones that are following the rules? Do we care about them at all? His comment basically was, yeah, those guys, those are really special people, and we sure hope that they can keep up the good work. Basically, that was the extent of the answer. Another great question came from an Italian reporter who said, you know, we've been hearing so much today, in the past week, about the Synod Fathers who've been listening and how great they are for accompanying families on their quest for self-fulfillment, but so said the questioner, what does that mean? That over the past 30 years then, since Familiaris Consortio, for example, the bishops have not been listening? They've been sitting around plugging their ears, or what? Now this question was good, and it was impassioned, and it sort of caused the panel at the press conference to squirm a little bit. And then we were immediately reassured by Cardinal Turkson that, well, that's really not the point, that we don't want to judge what the church has done in the past. We never stop listening to families. It's always a work in progress. And besides, said Turkson, situations change. Families are smaller now, for example. But Gaudium et Spes says that we must accompany the families and listen. Again, prompting many of us in the press hall to whisper beneath our breaths, what does he say? What was that? What are they talking about? They may not wish to judge how the church of the past taught, but the reality is that the church of the past judges them, and they have come up desperately wanting with their new listening techniques that sound like something right out of modern progressive education, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood or something. And it's never going to appease the modern world anyway. The Catholic Church is really not taken very seriously as a moral authority anyplace. And after the sex scandal, I don't think there are a whole lot of people who are looking to the Catholic Church for marital advice. They just want to keep listening. It's all they keep talking about. And the sex scandal in the priesthood didn't really even come up. They're just kind of not listening about that question, about that problem. Not a word has been brought up about that, which is a major problem that you would think the Synod on the Family would address, namely the fact that the priesthood has a crisis of credibility. Another member at the press conference today pointed out quite indignantly that the Synod doesn't seem to do enough to address the issue of homosexuality and homosexual families and so forth, because, so said the reporter, homosexuality is evidently just too taboo in many of the countries that are represented by the various bishops. So the question was, what about the final document? Will it show mercy toward homosexual families? And here's where today's press conference got pretty interesting. Cardinal Lacroix took umbrage, insisting that during the Synod we did speak to those with homosexual tendencies and that the question may yet be addressed even in the final document of the Synod. But, said the Cardinal, it certainly is not taboo, not at all. And of course not. What a silly thing to say. It's just one of the four sins that cry to heaven for vengeance, but no, not hardly taboo in the modern new church. We just need to listen to the sodomites a little bit more, and we'll have that figured out as well. And it was at this point that Cardinal Turkson jumped in with what might be the cat out of the bag moment for today's press conference anyway, when he said, quote, "In our small groups, we did raise this issue of homosexuality. And if you think homosexuality is taboo in Africa, you should go to Russia." And then everyone had a great big ha-ha laugh at the expense of those silly Ruskies who still believe that homosexual acts are wrong. But Cardinal Turkson then pointed out that when he was studying theology back in the United States in the 1970s, the manuals still listed homosexuality as an abnormality. Now that process has changed, he said, and it's no longer an abnormality. But there are still countries, get this, there are still countries that have a problem with homosexuality, said the Cardinal, and they need to have further training and education on this issue. Now, again, said the Cardinal Turkson, now, thanks to science, lots of countries are coming to understand this phenomenon of homosexuality, and we must give them a chance to grow and improve in this respect. End quote. Incredibly. What His Eminence meant by growing and changing and waking up with respect to one of the four sins that cries to heaven to avenge it, I have no idea. It's anyone's guess. But that the Church has more or less officially, at least de facto, abandoned the teachings on mortal sin and homosexual acts and so forth, even as laid out in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, that's pretty obvious that the Church now, as we move forward, is abandoning any talk of mortal sin or sins that cry to heaven for vengeance and so forth. So today's press conference concluded with Archbishop Leonard assuring the world's press that the Synod is putting an end to the Church that judges people. "We are not a church of judgment," he said. "We are a welcoming church, listening to the people and speaking in clear terms. Tenderness is the word of this Synod. This is the beginning of a new church," end quote. To which I say, as opposed to the old church, apparently which was all about judging people and making them feel terrible and unwelcome, you wonder how the Catholic Church converted half the world to the Catholic faith with such a terrible attitude over the past millennia, if all this is true. But Cardinal Turkson, he agreed, saying that the Synod is an emblem of the new church. Make of that what you will. So there you have it, folks. The Synod on the Family here in Rome is all about Francis's pledge to change the church dramatically and in such a way that no future church will ever be able to change it back, at least not humanly speaking. The new church listens, it learns from sinners, but no longer teaches them about sin and truth, heaven and hell, and the four last things in general. That's all way too medieval. Mater, see. Magister, forget about it. I'm Michael Matt for Remnant TV, coming to you from Rome. God bless you and keep praying.